talking about identity, of course, because that is my jam. But more specifically, I'm doing a new topic. So this is actually my first time doing this presentation or workshop. So I'm excited to finally share it. And it is called Pedagogy of Liberation for a reason because I feel like we're at a point in time where we're not only resourcing, as the conference theme suggests, but we're in a place where everybody's searching for liberation in their own way. And they're taking their own path towards that. And I feel like as educators, we look so often to people who are, you know, who write books, who are near us. But what's interesting is a lot of the lessons that we could use in order to address some of the inequity issues in our schools and the identity-based harm in our schools have already been shared by ancestors. So today, I want to tap into the ancestral wisdom of some of these thinkers and healers and storytellers who have provided us with these lessons. So I've compiled some of this ancestral knowledge and hopefully we'll get an opportunity to share that in these 45 minutes. But before I do so, it's always good to start with a land acknowledgement. So as I mentioned before, I am based in Zambia right now. So I want to take this time to acknowledge and honor the more than 70 distinct ethnic groups in Zambia. And some of the notable ones are the Bemba, Tonga, Lozi, Chewa, Ngoni, Lunda, Lubali, Kumbuka, Kaunde, Ila, and many others. And it's important that I acknowledge that I'm on this indigenous space of these ethnic groups so that we can let people know that they are very much alive and they're thriving in the space. So I want to make sure I start off with the acknowledgement. And then just a few learning objectives for the day. We're going to be examining how education not can be, but is a tool for liberation. So we're going to go more specific in that. And then I want to talk about some of the activists, storytellers, and healers who, in a way, serve as public educators in their own right, and some of the lessons that they share with us. And most importantly, with all this great theory, how do we put it into practice? How do we apply it into our own classroom with our students, with our school communities? So that's just a little bit of what we're going to be doing. So now, before we go ahead and start, I like to start with a Mentimeter. So I know people have used a Mentimeter before, but it's kind of like a word wall that's going to reveal some of our thoughts here. So there's a link here that I can copy and paste into the chat. If you have a QR code scanner, you could use that as well to access the Mentimeter and answer that question. What does liberation mean to you? But I would like for us to start off with that as a way to ground this presentation. So let me locate the chat. So I'm going to put that in the chat. And that is want folks to take a few seconds to put what liberation means to them, what words come to mind, what phrases. And then as people are doing that, I'm gonna go to the live wall to see what people are populating here. All right. So we have unshackling. I love that word. Powerful word. Freedom of thought, equality, freedom from oppression, honesty, equity, independence, change. Um, I see honesty again. What else? Empowerment of self, voice, safety, to breathe freely, awareness of self. These are some great answers. These are some great answers. But looking here, though, what I'm noticing is there is a recurrence of that word freedom. Freedom, freedom, freedom. And that's ultimately what a lot of our students are pursuing in their own right, but they don't always have the tools to know how to go about doing that. But so these are just some of these words that come up, and all these are terms or phrases or thoughts that will recur as I go through the information that I'll be sharing. So I want to go ahead and keep that going. So now, a pedagogy liberation, what exactly does that mean? So when we think about pedagogy liberation, these two scholars come to mind, and there are many others who have brought scholarship to this idea. So you have on the left Paulo Freire, and then on the right we have Bell Hooks, two important ancestors who we need to be aware of. So pedagogy liberation, when we think about that, we're talking about an approach to education that's rooted in critical consciousness. And we're doing this in a way that's dismantling systems of oppression. And how do we do that? We're centering lived experiences, cultural identities, and the collective agency, keyword collective agency of our learners. And these are just some of the ways in which we go about manifesting that pedagogy, which we'll go deeper into in the next few slides. So we're questioning dominant narratives, we're co-constructing knowledge, we're engaging in reflective praxis, and dialogic learning. It can't be a case where, like right now, I'm the one who's talking to you, but there should be opportunities where you're having a chance to speak with me and share your thoughts. So it has to reciprocate in that way. So as we're going through these next few slides, I want you to keep those thoughts in mind. Critical consciousness, dismantling system of oppression, and also those 4 points that you see here near the bottom. Those are very critical. Now, for these next few slides, we're going to tap into the ancestral wisdom of some of these thinkers. And there will be some lessons embedded within these quotes that I'm going to share with you. So I want to go ahead and start with one of my favorites, Bell Hooks. So Bell Hooks once said, sometimes people try to destroy you precisely because they recognize your power, not because they don't see it, but because they see it and they don't want it to exist. So I don't know if we have any DEIB leads or diversity coordinators in the space, but if you do any of that type of work, you could probably relate to that. You may have resistance from a headmaster or a head teacher. You may have resistance from board members or other community members and stakeholders. But and the reason why is because they know that what you're doing has influence. They know that you have a presence about you that is threatening to that status quo. And because of that, they engage in systemic practices to ensure that your voice and your power is usurped. So when we think about bell hooks, what she's saying is it's not that power is the problem, it's who's controlling the power, right? The power is in whose hands? Is it being shared? Is it being hoarded? Do we have people who are engaging in a paternalistic manner to where they're not delegating that power to other people within the space? So, how do we go about addressing this issue? Well, number one, we have to empower our students. How do we empower our students? We have to create spaces and opportunities where they're able to not only build agency, but also they're able to shape the decision-making process within their school community. They should be able to have a say or have input on things that are happening within the school. So we need to affirm that our students have power, and we need to provide opportunities for them to exert it in a way that's going to enhance the educational experience that they're experiencing. We got to recognize resistance. So part of preparing our students for the real world is get them to see that sometimes what you say, what you do is going to be threatening to others. Sometimes you don't have to say a word. Sometimes your presence alone will be threatening to those who may be insecure about themselves. So we have to prepare them for the pushback that they'll experience when they do speak truth to power. So it's not just adults, it's our young people as well. And having protected spaces. So we're not just talking about affinity groups, because we like to talk about affinity groups. How can we organically create classrooms where any student who comes into our space is seen authentically, their words are valued, they're honored for who they are, and there's no fear of consequence when they do say something or engage in an action that is authentically who they are? How do we create those spaces that are protective of all of our students, particularly our most marginalized ones? How do we do that? So we have to make sure that we design those spaces. And we'll talk more about the practical part of that later in the presentation. But I want to move on to Paulo Freire. He said that leaders who do not act dialogically but insist on imposing their decisions do not organize the people, they manipulate them. They do not liberate, nor are they liberated. They oppress. So if anyone's read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, then that quote should be one that's familiar to you. But let's break down what Paulo Freire is saying. He's basically saying that if we are to pursue liberation, it can't be a mandate. It has to be a conversation. We have to give our students spaces where they're able to express themselves and have input in the classroom. So that means co-creating curriculum, giving them a say as to how they learn best. So when we talk about metacognition, for example, we talk so much about metacognition and getting students to understand how they best learn. But how often do we give them or invite them to speak on that and to provide critical feedback that can allow for their learning experience to be one that's more accessible to them? We have to be honest about that, and we have to be very reflective when it comes to that. Facilitate, don't dictate. That's pretty self-explanatory. Yes, you're the teacher, but you can't monopolize the space by talking to them the whole time. How are you creating tasks? How are you going about your instruction? and your interactions with your students in a way that allows for them to learn mutually with you. Because as a teacher, you're also a student as well. So it's an exchange of information, it's an exchange of knowledge. I have funds of knowledge as the teacher, but guess what? My students have funds of knowledge that I can tap into so we can be better together. And then, of course, prioritizing critical dialogue, making sure that students are questioning what's happening around them, giving them all the information from all different angles, and giving them a space where they can interrogate what they're reading, what they're seeing, the messages that they're gaining from their communities. If we are to prepare them for the world where there's so many messages happening, especially with social media emerging the way it is in AI, it's important, it's imperative that we give them spaces to practice how to engage in critical dialogue and to interrogate what they're seeing. All right. So now we have Audre Lorde. So this is our last freedom fighter. Then we'll go into the healers. So Audre Lorde brings up this quote, and this is one of my favorites. The true focus of revolutionary change is never merely the oppressive situations that we seek to escape, but that piece of the oppressor which is planted deep within each of us. All of us have that piece of the oppressor planted within us, even myself. Yes, I am a Black person, but I was socialized into a community that was centered on norms and ideals of whiteness. And because of that, I have to unlearn some of those principles in order to feed new knowledge that's going to allow me to see other communities that I don't share anything with in a different light. So liberation begins within. We have to start with ourselves. When I was going through the process of writing my book, Learning to Relearn, I had to go about that myself. I had to ask the questions. I had to deal with my biases and the stereotype that I held about different communities and different people. That was a process I had to go through. And as I'm going through that, I'm noticing a transformation. I'm noticing that I'm becoming more emotionally intelligent because now I'm being mindful of what I say. I'm being mindful of the actions that I'm taking. I'm being mindful of how people are receiving my actions and my words. So that's all part of the process of self reflection. When you're being able to reflect, you're not only able to self correct and experience that transformation for yourself, but now you can model vulnerability. You can show people that when you lead with honesty and you're transparent about your own learning and unlearning, now you can get people to normalize self inquiry in themselves. You can get them to start questioning some of the things that they've been taught to believe, some of the things that they've never taken the time to interrogate about the world, but most importantly, themselves. So the liberation has to start from within. And that's something that we can't expect our students to do if we are not modeling that for them. We have to model that so that they can then normalize that for themselves. So liberation begins from within, Audre Lorde, and that should be a starting point for all of us. So I'm looking at the time, and we're doing good right now. So because there were so many people, I've had to truncate this presentation to highlight some key points. So right here, we have for the healers, we have Trisha Hersey, who is the author of Rest is Resistance, a manifesto. I don't know if people have read Rest is Resistance, but it's a powerful book. You have to read it. And then here is Adrienne Marie Brown, who has written books such as We Will Not Cancel Us and Emergent Strategy. So these two women are powerful healers in the space, and they provide a lot of wisdom. And they're still very much alive too. So I know I said ancestors, but they're very much alive, these two. So I'm gonna focus on Adrienne Marie Brown for this one. So I don't know what happened to the quote, but that's all right. So she focused on the fact that listening is the most radical act of learning. And I want to go ahead and share a story. So this is something that happened to me literally a couple days ago. So I'm a member of ALOC. So ALOC is the Association of International Educators and Leaders of Color. And within ALOC, we have an African Educators Affinity Group. And we're in the process of organizing an inaugural virtual conference that's happening in a few weeks. But then I designed the flyer, and it's supposed to be a Pan-African event. So pretty much all African educators from all across the continent and beyond supposed to be a part of it. So on my flyer that I'm advertising, it's a map of Africa with all the flags embedded within it. So I'm thinking to myself, all right, that's cool. I'm showing people that we are united as one continent, right? But then I get an email from an ALOC member who happens to be from Morocco, and she told me that the imagery of the map was offensive to her culture because it triggered some moments of her country's history where they were fighting for their sovereignty and freedom. So just to long story short, I had to take the time to listen to that member. She educated me. She called me in. She gave me information that I took the time to read, and I learned. And immediately, I apologized publicly on social media, and I changed the map and it only happened because I took the time to listen. It wasn't about intent. It was about the impact. And that is something that we have to strengthen your muscle. We have to strengthen our muscles for. We have to take the time to practice that and practice because we can't expect our students to engage in active and radical listening if we're not doing that with ourselves. So what does that mean? We have to cultivate deep listening. When we actively listen to our students, we're building trust and collaboration in the classroom space. We're decentering the ego. We're humbling ourselves and saying, you know what? I made a mistake and I need to make amends so that we can restore peace in the space. And then there's critical openness, suspending assumptions, recognizing that in order for me to really engage authentically in the learning process, I have to humble myself and say, guess what? I don't know everything. And there are still things that I need to learn. So having the openness and having the transparency to acknowledge that is key. So listening is something that we need to do. And I feel like we would live in a more harmonious world if people just took the time to listen to each other and not assume who people are. We do a lot of hearing, we do a lot of responding, but we don't always listen. And I think that's an important trait that we all have to embody so we can model it to others. All right. So we're down to the last section, storytellers. Storytellers. So here we have Gloria Andaluza, who is an incredible author, and she has a book called Borderlands, La Frontera. So all these books that I'm mentioning will be in the resource kit that you'll get at the end. So if you're trying to copy them down, don't worry, I got you. I have all these titles. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. So if you've seen her TED talk about the dangers of a single story, if you read her books, um, first off, I recommend her TED talk. You got to watch that. But she is another Nigerian author who's written some incredible works. And then here on the right is Hanani K. Trask. So she was a professor at the University of Hawaii. So she is an activist, and she was instrumental in making sure that the Hawaiian school system was mandating the teaching of Hawaiian dialects in schools. So she had to push for that within her community. But these are all storytellers who have different perspectives. But for the sake of time, I'm only going to share about one of them, and you can read about the others in the resource kit. So this is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She says, stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. So this is from Chimamanda Ngozi. And what she's saying succinctly is this: who tells the story shapes the soul. So this one really hit me because I'm actually in the process of reading this book. So this is a book I'm reading right now called The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I don't know if people have read The Message, but in this book, I think there's a few sections that talks about Palestine, the Israeli occupation of Palestine, and what's happening. So the author Ta-Nehisi Coates, he actually traveled to Israel and Palestine just to see what was going on for himself. And he writes about some of the experiences that he had while he was there. And the reason why is because when you listen to the news, when you hear certain people speak about the Israeli occupation of it, when you see it taught in different schools, sometimes it's not taught in a way that provides the full spectrum of what's happening. So when we think about stories, it goes back to what we said in the beginning about the importance of interrogating what we're listening to, interrogating what we read, but also speaking to the actual people who are from there and can give a firsthand account. So near the end of this story, he goes to Chicago to talk to a 91-year-old man who's from Palestine, was living there around 1948 when the Israelis officially occupied the country. He talks about how he had to flee from the country and has not been able to come back. So 1948, we're in 2025, we're talking 77 years. He has not been able to come back into his own country. His granddaughter, who's in the book, I'm actually going to be interviewing later on today on my podcast. So she could tell her story. But I mentioned this because people, the thing is, the reason why some people deal with identity-based harm is because of the stories that are being told about them. It's because of what the media says about them. It's because of what people believe to be true about them. The narratives, the stereotypes, the whitewashing of information. All these play a role in how the souls of people from marginalized communities are shaped. So how do we deal with that? We have to diversify the narratives. We have to make sure that we're letting the people from those communities share their stories and perspectives uninterrupted. We also have to make sure that we're evaluating what our students are reading. We're looking at our libraries to see what books are there. And we're making sure that they are free from bias and they're authentically telling the stories of the communities that are being represented in the books. And also we have to look at our curriculum materials as well to make sure that it's not sharing a narrative that's the dominant one, right? And then stories are a form of resistance. When we share our story, when people come on my podcast to share their story, they're sharing it because it's a way for them to counter what's being said about their community, what's being said about them. So that's where the resistance comes in. It's a way for them to be restored. It's a way for them to reclaim who they are and their identity. So when we think about the power of storytelling, there's a humanistic element within that that allows for the storyteller to feel at home and to feel restored and free because they're able to share what people don't know about them. So we always got to be mindful of who's sharing the stories and what their ulterior motives are. What are their agendas when they're sharing the stories? So that's important. Whew, that's a lot. Now we're gonna get to the the practical part of all this. So, a lot of us are teachers or in the school. We come to these sessions where we hear theory, theory, theory. Now I'm going to tell you some actual things you can do in your space to apply some of these principles that I shared. So when we talk about liberation in the classroom, these are the 5 components that we should focus on. Number 1, centering student voice. Number 2, critically engaging with the curriculum that we're teaching our students. Number 3, what are we doing to affirm the diverse and intersectional identities of our students? 4, as teachers, how do we play the role of the learner along with our students in the classroom space? And number 5, are we adopting restorative practices within our school community? So these are the 5 areas. And now let's hear some ideas from each of these. So centering student voice, what does that look like? And these are just a small sample of things you can do. Student-led conferences. When parents show up, rather than you, the teacher, sharing how the student is doing, let the student go ahead and share how they're doing. And it could be them coming with a portfolio of work that they've done, exemplars of their work that they share with parents, and they're providing feedback on their performance. There's youth participatory action research that students can do. When we talk about classroom constitution, that's like the contract. but that involves the teacher and the student coming together to co-create norms and practices that they want to see happen in the classroom space. And then having the teacher play the role of the facilitator, or vice versa, the student play the role of the facilitator. Are we giving students opportunities to be the teacher so they can teach others? So rotating those roles, right? So that's just something we can do to center student voice. Now, as far as critical engagement with curriculum, there's equity book audits we can do. We can also have students engage in Socratic seminars where they can debate and have some critical dialogue around specific topics that they're discussing in class. And then we also have to take time to evaluate the amount of bias that's in our instructional materials. So that's our textbooks, that's our worksheets, that's our dittos, um, the scope and sequence that we refer to when we are teaching students and navigating the curriculum. We have to analyze that and audit that. And then with text sets, we're pairing common reads with other books that have a similar perspective. So I don't know if we have any literature teachers in our space, but if you're a literature teacher, then you may have some familiarity with the text sets and building those so that you're able to provide some reads that are relevant to the students who are in front of you, right? So those are just a few examples here. And then this is my favorite section here, affirming the identities of our students. So these are just a few ideas, and I'll share a few of them. Translanguaging has to happen. If we have students from multilingual backgrounds, we have to provide access to them in a way that allows for them to access their home language while they're still learning while they're still building their English proficiency. We have to provide them with opportunities to still access the home language so they could be a part of the classroom experience. So, and there's a lot of research that focuses on translanguage and how powerful that is. Identity maps are always powerful. Affirmation mirrors, where you're putting messages on the mirror, quotes, different affirmative words that students can look at as they look at themselves in the mirror to build that positive self-image. And then my favorite one is the me bag. So the me bag is basically an activity where you put 3 artifacts inside a bag that talk about your life and who you are, different aspects of it. And for each one that you take out of the bag, there's a short story that you're going to share that talks about it. So this is a really simple exercise. I've used it with my own students over the years, and they love it. And as I mentioned before, you'll get those instructions in the resource kit, which is coming up very soon. All right, I got, I think, 5 minutes, I think. So I'll be quick. Thank you. Teachers as co-learners. So what does that mean? Going back to student agency, going back to student voice. Some teachers do ask me anything reflection panels where maybe at the end of the week on a Friday, they have students ask them anything that they want, and they share responses to the questions that students have. We talked about co-constructing curricular units with students, providing students opportunities to give feedback on lessons, give feedback on different assignments. We also talk about artifacts, sharing artifacts with students and having them have the opportunity to express what they've learned. as a result of this artifact. And then there's learning walks as well. And then finally, we have adoptive, we have, I'm sorry, restorative practices. So what did that look like? There's classroom agreements, which I talked about earlier. Some classrooms may have a peace corner where you need to de-escalate and give yourself some time away from the community and then come back when you're ready. Journaling is something that's also powerful as a way to process your emotions in written form so others can, read that. And then we have restorative circles. So with restorative circles, it's a space where we're practicing as a community how to be empathetic, how to actively listen, how to give grace, how to forgive. And it's something that goes away from the punitive approach and focuses more on reflection and empathy and mutual accountability as a community. All right. And then to end it here, maybe in the chat, I've shared a lot of information with you all today, and I appreciate you all for staying with me. Inside the chat, if you could just share one commitment that you're prepared to make today. It could be small, it could be big, it could be medium size, but what is one thing that you're prepared to do leaving this space today? So I'll give people a chance to just share some thoughts in the chat before we wrap up. All right, empower my students in the curriculum, all areas of school life, inviting more storytelling. I love it. Ensure that teams are trained on how to center student voice. Working on my storytelling and story listening. Awesome. Those are some great ideas. Doing the me bag. So, man, a lot of y'all are really into the storytelling. I'm not gonna lie to you. That was my favorite part too. I love the stories. So if you loved all that, I do have some gifts for you all. Because when you're presenting to teachers, you can't leave them empty-handed, right? So here, if you scan this QR code, it takes you to the resource kit, and it provides you with pretty much a summary of what I just shared with you all today and some additional information about my book, Learning to Relearn, my podcast, which you all can listen to. Those are all, well, the podcast is free. And then Learn to Relearn, that one you can buy. But I talk about a lot of these things in the book. So you can actually access it there. And then for those who want to stay connected, here's my information.
Perfect. I was just going to ask and ended it beautifully. Thank you, Kwame, so much. Oh my goodness. So many things. And I don't know about everyone else, but my overwhelming sense of so much that is possible as a result of what you've done today. You've given us some really solid foundations and some really practical ways of putting this into action. And it can be simple, but so beautiful and empowering as the me bag, which I think for me is a metaphor for it all. Pull out those stories and claim who you are. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for everyone for being here. So you're very, very welcome. We now have an extended break, and I'm going to pop the link to the schedules again in the chat. We come back at 9:50, and the next ones are boundaries, brains, and breaks in this room. And in the other room, we have Unshakable Leadership Tools for Crisis and Uncertainty. So enjoy, have a bit of time to re-nourish and process all that incredible stuff that we've just had from Kwame. And we'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much. I loved it.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Fantastic. Great. Right. I will leave this open. No, I'm going to close this room. Hi, Chris.